Hello, everyone. Welcome to a joint webinar with Autism Society and NDSC entitled Our Voices Are Stronger Together, How to Become Engaged in Grassroots Advocacy. My name is Lauren Camp. I'm with the National Down Syndrome Congress, and I will be assisting with the webinar today. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded and we will distribute the link within the next 48 hours so that it can be replayed later. We will be having closed captioning on the recording. It may be slightly later than the recording itself, but we will distribute that as well. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. You can ask questions via the control panel on the right side of your screen. If your control panel is collapsed, you should see an arrow at the top right to open it. Questions will be held until the end of the presentation, but let's go ahead and get started. Welcoming Kim Mushino, who is the Vice President of Public Policy at ASA. Thanks, Kim.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us today. This is just a quick agenda of what we're going to be covering. Mainly, we're just going to be covering what is advocacy, basic government processes, and how to become an effective advocate. But first, for introductions, again, my name is Kim Mushino. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy at the Autism Society of America, which is a large grassroots organization started in 1965, representing individuals with autism and their families. We have approximately 80 affiliates across the country. And Heather?
Hi, thanks, Kim. This is Heather Sachs, and I'm the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for the National Down Syndrome Congress. NDSC is also a very old organization, started in 1973, and we're the largest national organization serving individuals with Down syndrome, their families and professionals through different resources, advocacy, and a very large national convention that I'll talk a little bit about later on in the presentation.
Nicole?
Hello, I'm Nicole Blank, disability rights activist. I'm also the PAL coordinator for the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices. I'm a Vermont Land alumni, advocacy specialist, state of Maryland.
Super. Thanks, Nicole.
And I'm also the author of a book on Disability Employment Policy 101.
And Nicole worked as a public policy fellow here at Autism Society for last year. All right, so moving on. So generally, what is advocacy? It's generally just influencing public policy, but that doesn't mean just about legislation, bills, and laws. Influencing public policy is broader. It can also include helping us to seek adequate funding or money to implement the laws and programs, and it can include monitoring laws so that they're implemented correctly and helping to implement them correctly in states and local areas and federally. It can be interpreting the laws and also enforcing the laws. To be an advocate, it really helps if you can use a personal story, just talking about real stories in your communities and putting a face on the issues. They always say the best way to get a message across is if you can link a personal story with the policy objective. So when you go to talk to your member of Congress or any elected official, it's really great if you can understand the history and the policy that you wish to change, and then try to bring in a real life story like about yourself or your family to show how the policy can be changed to be more effective. So grassroots advocacy is basically all of you at the local level. Just everybody can be an advocate, and we call that grassroots advocacy. So we both have grassroots organization, and we feel that together we can be more powerful when we get all of our grassroots working together. NDSC and Autism Society work together here a lot at the national level, and we are hoping that that could be extended in the states and local areas so that you can work together, because we have a lot of overlapping public policy agenda. So why is advocacy important? Well, because healthcare, long-term services, education, housing, employment, many of our goals are supported by federal government programs and federal funding. But our legislators, our elected officials, they want to hear directly from their constituents, those in their districts that can vote for them. They don't really want to hear from advocates at the federal level or lobbyists. They prefer to hear directly from people in their states and local districts. So that's where you come in. You can be very effective as people with disabilities who have direct experience with these programs. A lot of the members of Congress really don't understand what it's like to be in the shoes of a person with disability or a family member. If they don't have a connection to disability, then they don't really understand what it's like. Some members of Congress, don't even understand what it's like to have to navigate the federal system of policy programs. They don't know what it's like to be to try to apply for a Medicaid waiver. They don't know what it's like to try to get a job as a person with disabilities. They don't know what the vocational rehabilitation system is. So it's up to us, the grassroots advocates, to help them understand how federal programs really apply to people on the ground. So to be a good advocate, it's really important, or helpful at least, to understand some of the basic government structures and processes, so that you can, if you understand how, for example, how a bill becomes a law, what it takes to become a law, then you have a better understanding of where the pressure points are, when you should be talking to, for example, somebody in the Department of Education, or what's the most important person that can make decisions on federal funding for IDEA? Should you be talking to the Appropriations Committee, or should you be talking to the House Education Committee, and who are the leaders? And what's the timing on different pieces of legislation? So doing what you're doing, which is participating in this webinar and going to partners in policy making and things like that, really help you become a more informed and therefore more effective advocate. So we're just going to go over a little bit of, 8th grade social studies, the 3 branches of the government, because basically public policy involves all 3 branches of the federal government. And that includes the executive branch, which is the President of the United States, and the administration, or the cabinet secretaries. The legislative branch, which we'll be mostly talking about today, which is Congress, which is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And then, of course, the judicial branch, or the Supreme Court, and all the other federal courts that interpret the laws. So first, the president and the administration. The president, while the president can't introduce a bill, the president can come up with ideas for a bill, and then they have to actually get somebody in Congress to introduce the legislation, because only members of Congress can introduce legislation. But the president also has a lot of power in that the president gets to sign or veto bills that have been passed by Congress. So when members of Congress are thinking about legislation, they have to keep in mind that they need to create the legislation in a way and take into consideration what the president would like, because ultimately the president gets to sign or not sign the bill. The president also gets to appoint the cabinet. And so Heather and I and Nicole and other federal disability policy advocates also interact quite often with some of the heads of the government. For example, we frequently interact with officials within the Department of Labor, the Departments of Health and Human Services, and Department of Education, sometimes the Department of Justice, and then some of the lower offices within those departments. Because the Department of Education, for example, has the job of overseeing all the education laws. So, for example, when IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Law, was passed, then the Department of Education had the responsibility of writing the regulations to make sure that it's implemented correctly. It fills in the details of the laws. And then the Department of Education also gets to oversee IDEA and other education laws. They provide guidance, they enforce the law, which of course is, for education, it's very hard to enforce our education rights laws, because the only enforcement mechanism they really have is to take money away when states aren't doing the right thing. But they are supposed to be enforcing the laws. And then, as I said, the federal agencies write the regulations that make the laws work. So let's move on to the Congress. As I mentioned before, there's two chambers and they work very differently. So we have to keep that in mind when we interact with them. There's the Senate that's made up of 100 members. Each of us has 2 senators, because there's 2 senators per state, and they have a longer term than representatives in the House. They have a 6-year term, and members of the Senate, they call it the upper chamber. They kind of think more nationally and also statewide, because they represent the entire state. The other difference is that they have a 6-year term, so they're not constantly thinking about being reelected like the poor people in the House of Representatives. As soon as a person in the House gets elected, they only have a 2-year term and they're already thinking about how they're going to be reelected. Also in the House, we have 435 members. We each have a representative that represents our district. So districts are smaller, and therefore representatives think more locally. They're really concerned about that smaller area, not as much statewide and not quite as much nationally. And so we take that into consideration when we're going to visit with members of Congress. And so they're very different also in that the House, because there's 435 members, that's a lot of people to keep in control of. So they actually have a lot more rules, but having more rules, like a large family, helps them move legislation along more efficiently. And so, ironically, it's actually easier to get bills passed through the House because the rules keep things going. The Senate is generally more loose, and each senator has much more power individually. They try to operate on unanimous consent, so they consider themselves much more collegial, and trying to work together, because they have to try to avoid any kind of individual member filibustering or preventing or slowing down legislation. So they really try to work out their differences. It used to be a lot more collegial than it is now. We are definitely operating in a very partisan atmosphere right now, and that has made things a lot more difficult to move in, especially in the Senate, where there's almost always somebody deciding to slow down or filibuster legislation. And that means that we almost always need to have 60 votes to overcome a filibuster, whereas we used to sometimes just be able to pass things by unanimous consent or by majority. Now, with individual senators frequently filibustering or slowing down or stopping legislation, it's much more difficult to get 60 votes in order to get things passed. And this means that we here at the federal level, we have to make sure that anything that we want to move has to be bipartisan. So NDSC and Autism Society work very hard to make sure that any legislation that we help get introduced or want to move gets bipartisan support. And that's something that we rely on our grassroots for, to help us develop champions on both sides of the aisle, because of course disability is a nonpartisan issue. So each senator and representatives get to serve on various committees, and we can talk about that more later, but committees are very important because we pay attention to particular committees that have jurisdiction over issues that we care the most about. Again, that would be like things like the Education Committee, or the Health, on the Senate side, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. So understanding where your members serve is also important, so that you can know whether your member has more influence if they're on a committee that has jurisdiction over issues that we care about. And of course, we have links to all of those committees on each of our websites. It's also important to understand that committee chairs have a lot of power. In fact, it's also important to understand that whoever's in the majority has a lot of power. So right now, for example, the House of Representatives, the Democrats are in the majority in the House of Representatives. That means that the Speaker has a lot of power to decide which bills will be considered on the House floor. It also means that the chairs of the committees are all chaired by Democratic members, and they get to decide what legislation will come before their committees. And even during hearings, they get to decide who's going to be brought as witnesses on important legislation. So it's very powerful. In the Senate, currently, the Republicans are in the majority. That means, same as the House, the Republicans chair all of the committees, and the Senate Majority Leader is Republican and gets to decide what legislation is going to be brought to the Senate floor. So that's a very, very powerful position to be in. So Congress has a lot of power, mainly to build revenue through taxes, where our federal dollars are going to be spent, regulating trade, of course, declaring war, developing our military and National Guard, post office, and running all of federal property, like our parks. So how does a bill become a law? Well, Heather and I included a link to the Schoolhouse Rock video that many of you might be familiar with. I've watched it when I was growing up, but it's still really relevant. It's a really great video because it explains very easily like what the steps are. And basically the steps are that only a member of Congress can introduce a bill. And many members of Congress do, but then it's not that easy to get a bill through Congress and sign into law. There's basic steps, and then there's a lot of little steps in between that are not really on here that we'll explain more about. But basically, once a bill is introduced in Congress, then it's assigned a committee or a subcommittee of jurisdiction over the issue. So for example, if you introduce a bill that is related to education, it'll go to the Education Committee. If it's related to rights, it will go to the Judiciary Committee. What's that? Hey, Nicole.
Yeah, I'm still a stop, but
Okay, thank you. Once a bill is in subcommittee or committee, the chair can decide to hold hearings. And the purpose of hearings is to basically to gather information about the subject matter. They try to find experts, and those experts can be you, individuals with disabilities, and family members, because you know the disability issues better than anybody because you're living it. So, in fact, we just had Heather and I helped to produce a briefing on employment issues, and we sought out families from our grassroots to come and talk about what it's like to try to get a job as a person with developmental disabilities. And it was very successful. So keep that in mind. So hearings, the purpose of hearings is for committees to gather expertise. Once they have hearings and gather all their information, and they feel good about the legislation, then the committee will separately hold what's called a markup. They call it a markup because that's when the committee literally used to have the paper bill in front of them, and they would provide amendments. They would literally mark it up in the margins of the bill, and then the committee would discuss the bill, offer amendments, pass amendments, not pass amendments, and then at the end of the markup session, vote on whether to pass the bill out of the committee. So if a bill is lucky enough to be passed out of the committee, then it will go to either the full House or Senate, and then the full chamber gets to debate the bill and provide amendments and then pass it or not pass it. And then this has to happen in both the House and Senate because you have to have identical bills go through the House and Senate before it can be signed into law. If the House and Senate have different bills on the same subject, then they have to have a conference committee meet and discuss the differences between the bills, because like I said, the only way a bill can go to the president is if it's passed by the House and Senate in identical form. Once it's passed by the House and Senate in identical form, then it goes to the president, who will sign it into law, hopefully. So that is really the basic outline of how a bill becomes law, and it's important for our grassroots advocates to understand, because when you're trying to influence the outcome, what we do is we try to help you figure out who to contact when. So if a bill is being marked up in one of the committees, then Heather and I will likely send you an action alert saying, hey, this bill is being marked up in the Education Committee. Now's the time to call your member of Congress, especially if they're on that committee, and say, please pass the bill in the Education Committee. So that's why it's important to understand the process. Then once a bill becomes a law, there's a completely different process, unfortunately, for funding the law. Because we have authorization laws and then we have appropriations bills. For example, let's see, the Lifespan Respite Care Act, which we're working on, is a law that originally would have authorized, like, say, $200 million for lifespan respite across the country. Unfortunately, the Appropriations Committee has only dedicated, in the current bill, $6 million for the Lifespan Respite Care Act. So we have to, once a law is passed, we then have to separately go to appropriations committees and urge them to appropriate the right amount of money for the program to work well. So basically, the federal budget is how the Congress plans to spend the money that they get in revenues through taxes. And every year, the federal government makes a budget called the budget resolution. Then they have to develop a budget in both the House and then the Senate. Then they have to take that overall budget number and give an allocation to the 12 appropriations subcommittees. Then the subcommittees then develop an idea of how they're going to spend that money on each of the individual's programs. And this is all supposed to be done before the new fiscal year begins on October 1. Now, and then so all 12 appropriations bills should be passed by October 1. Then the president gets to sign each of those 12 individuals appropriations bills. If it's not done by October 1, then the Congress is permitted to pass a continuing resolution to keep those programs running while they're still working out the differences between the appropriations bills. And we'll talk a little bit more about where we are right now. So what if the Congress can't agree on a budget? Well, actually, that's where we are right now. We're hoping that we don't have another government shutdown like we did 2 years ago, because that is very detrimental to our country and to our economy, and we don't want that to happen. It's very disruptive to our federal programs. But we are currently under a continuing resolution until November 21st, and we are hoping that our members of Congress can work out, come to agreement on the 12 appropriations bills and pass them before November 21st. But it's looking more and more likely that members of Congress will have to pass another short-term continuing resolution. And there's even a possibility that Congress will give up on coming to an agreement because they have they haven't been able to come to agreement on healthcare spending, on Affordable Care Act is controversial, the border wall has been controversial, and of course right now we're in impeachment hearings, and that is going to complicate things as well. So it's looking more and more likely that Congress may decide to pass a full year continuing resolution, which means that all of our government programs will continue at level funding. And that's good and bad. That means we won't have major cuts, but we were also hoping to get some important increases in programs such as IDEA and the Lifespan Respite Care Act. So we would be very disappointed if it's a full year CR. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague here to talk about how to be an effective advocate.
Great, thank you, Kim. So now that you guys have an idea of how the federal government works and how the budget process works, where can you get started, and how can you become an effective advocate? So I'm going to talk a little bit about ways you can stay informed, some trainings and conferences, sharing your personal story, social media, and how to take action. So staying informed. If you do nothing else, please, at the end of this webinar, go on both the NDSC and Autism Society websites and sign up for our monthly policy e-newsletters. That tells you what we're working on. It also has calls to action in there, so it's a really good digest. There's also some great newsletters from some of our other coalition organizations, the ARC, AUCD, the National Disability Rights Network, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. Sign up for all of them, get the news to your inbox. You can also like us on social media. Both Autism Society and NDSC Policy have social media accounts on Facebook and Twitter. We often put out information that way. There are also some news sources that you can start to get notices from and like them. Disability Scoop is one. They do a really good job of digesting all of disability related news. I believe you can get up to 3 articles a month for free without getting a subscription, or you may decide to get a subscription. Politico and the major newspapers are really good sources as well. well. It's a neat little trick. In Google, you can actually put alerts on keywords. So following along with the education example, if you're really interested in IDEA implementation, you can put that in keywords, and you can set it up where you can actually get a digest every day of the news from around the country that's going on with that. And as I said, both Autism Society and NDSC have online action centers. You can find that on our website, and the links are on the slide. This will enable you to register for action alerts, which I will talk about a little bit later. Okay, so trainings and conferences. You've taken a great first step by sitting in on this webinar, listening to it afterwards. Thank you very much. We also would highly recommend the Disability Policy Seminar in Washington, D.C. Both Autism Society and NDSC are partners in this seminar this year with several other disability groups. It's going to be held from March 23rd to 25th in D.C. It's 2 days of intensive training. There is a 101 track for folks that do not know the specifics of policies, basics. There are also more advanced workshops and panels that you can attend. It all culminates on the final day on a Hill Day, where we all go up to the Hill together and visit our elected officials. So it's really exciting, and it's a wonderful way to learn and to network with other advocates and to establish relationships with your elected officials. And registration for that will be open in early December, but in the meantime, you can go on the website and check out some of the logistics that are listed there. NDSC, we have an annual convention every year. This upcoming summer, it's going to be in New Orleans in the end of June, and there's an advocacy boot camp training day there. So if you're inclined to come to the convention, we'd highly recommend coming to our training. Each state has partners in policy making programs. You can usually get information about that through your state DD council, your Developmental Disabilities Council. Also, many states have Developmental Disabilities Day at the state legislature. While Kim and I mostly do legislation, we mostly do advocacy and lobbying on the federal level. States are just as important, if not more important, in this current environment where so much power is being given to the states. So I would highly recommend signing up and just attending your state DD Day. Often, again, that is sponsored and coordinated by your state DD council or your state ARC. Should have information about that. Similarly, join a group for a day at Capitol Hill or City Hall. You don't have to be the one leading this effort. Just join, tag along, get the resources, and establish a comfort level with meeting with elected officials. And then just a quick note about coalition work and cross-disability groups. There are very, very few issues that are autism specific or Down syndrome specific. Most of the issues that we're working on affect the entire disability community. And so it's really, really important to, expand beyond that diagnosis specific bubble to work with other groups. Our voices are definitely stronger together. And Kim and I practice that regularly in DC, working with a ton of other groups. Okay, so grassroots advocacy programs. NDSC has a program called the National Down Syndrome Advocacy Coalition. There's information about it on our website. We actually have members from almost all 50 states, and these are individuals with Down syndrome, their family members or other allies of all different levels of experience. The only prerequisite is that you become an official member of the National Down Syndrome Congress to do that. We have quarterly webinars with our policy team where we go through every policy issue that we're working on and tell you what's going on and what we see coming down the track. We have a closed Facebook group to discuss policy issues and also have other training opportunities available. Autism Society has a wonderful grassroots section on their website. They have a whole action center. In addition to the newsletter, which I talked about earlier, there's a lot of great information on there and webinars. And of course, if you come to the Disability Policy Seminar, both Kim and I will be there, and I'm sure would love to get together with folks from both of our groups and learn advocacy skills together. Okay, so you've probably heard us talking about telling your story. And I cannot emphasize how important this is. You absolutely do not have to be a policy expert. Even we get a little wonky sometimes when we're explaining these issues. You are an expert, as Kim said, in your disability, in your life. If you don't tell your story to your elected official, how will they know? And so the most powerful tool is this story. And we really encourage everyone to develop a one-page leave behind. This can actually be adapted to many different situations. There's an example of it on this slide. Basically, you would put in your contact information, including your street address. It's really important to show that you're a constituent of the person who you're talking to. A photo. Photos are so important to put a face to the name. A few sentences about yourself, and then it's always good to have an ask. Would you please co-sponsor this particular bill? Please vote against this particular bill, and then thanking them, always thanking them. If you just take a few minutes when you get a chance and create one of these leave behinds, you'll find that you'll actually be able to use it in many different situations. You can just quickly adapt it. It is so, so important, particularly for people who are not comfortable speaking or not able to speak or are afraid that they're not going to be able to get their entire story out there. So please think about creating a leave behind. Also wanted to point out that NDSC has created an advocacy toolkit for self-advocates. Our policy team worked with our self-advocate council and developed this. It goes through the basics of the legislative process and much of this, much of the tips that we're giving you, and also provides advice from other self-advocates. That's available for free download on our website. So would highly recommend it for everyone new to advocacy. There's other ways to tell your story. So there's op-eds and writing letters to the editor, blogs. The Mighty is an online news service that likes to publish personal blogs, personal stories from self-advocates and family members. Do you have any connections with entertainment personalities? It's often great to go on a local TV or radio show and talk about why a particular issue is impacting you and your family. Video clips are very, very effective, and my advice on this would be to always keep them pretty short. So video clips are so easy to make these days. We can all just do them with our phones, and they can easily be shared on social media. I put on the slide an example of a short video that was actually made a couple of years ago during the Medicaid fight, when the Congress was proposing block granting and capping and cutting Medicaid. And on a Facebook group that I'm part of, we just put out a call for various self-advocates and family members to send short videos as to why Medicaid is important to them. Someone volunteered to put it all together in a video, and it wound up getting a 500,000 views and was very, very effective. So just other ways to tell your story. And of course, if you have that bio, you will be able to use it at any time. Okay, action alerts. So both NDSC and the Autism Society have software that makes it very, very easy for you to contact your elected officials. Go onto our websites and sign up for action alerts. And when there is something really important that's happening where we need you to weigh in, we will send alerts to you. Through email, we'll also post them online. If you sign up for our alerts, though, you'll get personalized email. The alerts that we send to you will be personalized to your exact address. So it will give you all the information you need, who your elected officials are, what their email and phone number is. We will also give you talking points. You're welcome to use those exactly, or you can customize them. I want to emphasize just the importance that if we think something is important enough to send out an alert about, we really need you to take action. The staff in Congress is often literally keeping tallies of calls that they're receiving from constituents for or against a certain issue, and that will inform how they tell the senator or representative to vote on a particular bill. You absolutely do not need to be a policy expert. These calls take 30 seconds to a minute. They just want to hear from you. They want to hear that this issue matters to you. So please, please respond to our action alerts. Also, there are national call-in days where a lot of organizations will join together and push out action alerts on the same day. We actually have one coming up tomorrow on the Able Age Adjustment Act, and you'll see that NDSC, the Autism Society, and many other disability organizations will be putting out the call to action tomorrow to get the Able Age Adjustment Act passed. Again, please make that quick call or send the emails to your legislators because numbers really do count. Okay, so meeting and building relationships with elected officials. It is super, super important, again, to put a face to the name and build relationships with the elected official and also their staff. You can do this in DC or you can do this in their local office. All senators have multiple local offices around the state. All representatives will have at least one office in their district. And you're a constituent. It doesn't matter if you voted for the person or not. They represent you. And you can at any time, call and make an appointment and say, I want to come in and meet with someone in the office. You may not be able to meet, especially the first time, with the actual elected official, but staff are just as important. So it's important to build those relationships with staff and tell your personal story. The elected officials look to staff to sort of specialize on different issues and look to their staff for advice on how they should vote on particular issues. Please always invite a self-advocate. Nicole is going to talk a little bit about this shortly, the importance of the self-advocate voice. They should be central to everything that we are doing, and let them talk as much as they're comfortable. You can certainly, go over some talking points beforehand. This self-advocate story is the most important to share. Keep in touch with the staff and the elected official. They love to get things like holiday cards, have your child draw a picture for them, send photos if your child's in the newspaper or you accomplish something and you're in a newsletter, send it to them with a quick note. You are their constituent, whether you voted for them or not. They want to know what's going on in their district. Social media, it's great to like, retweet, different posts from your elected officials, publicly thank them. If you meet with them, definitely take a picture, even if it's just with staff. Have someone take a picture with your phone and post it on your social media accounts. Thank you so much to so-and-so for meeting with us today to discuss disability issues. And they really appreciate that, and it helps. Okay, so just some words about engaging with elected officials on social media. Social media lasts forever. I think we all know that, but sometimes we slip. And so we really need to always be respectful in our posts, particularly when we're talking about hot button political issues. I always say, you can criticize policies, but not individuals. There's a phrase that I really live by that a bunch of my friends have said as well when talking about this. And that's that there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. So in politics, so an elected official that votes one way on a bill that maybe really disappoints you or angers you, they could come back and become the biggest champion on the next bill. And so it's really, really important to maintain those relationships. And Twitter is very important too. Oftentimes it's the staff that's on Twitter. So make sure that you're tagging the elected official and using the hashtags and sharing your messages that way. All right, so showing up and leading is also important. That's a picture of my friend Frank Stevens testifying for NIH funding for Down syndrome, and I will never forget his line that my life matters, I matter. Again, showing up, especially for local meetings, whether it's your school board or your city council. Often all you have to do is just sign up online or in person, and you'll be able to make your voice heard and your pictures known. Again, take pictures, post it on social media, and email me and Kim too if you're out there advocating, and we'd be happy to support you. It is super important to register to vote. You have a right to vote and your opinion matters. We're just starting to see some of the presidential candidates put out disability platforms. Voters with disabilities and their families are a very powerful voting bloc. And it's very important to read up on candidates and issues before you go to the polls so you know who you're going to vote for. Neither NDSC nor Autism Society will endorse particular candidates. We cannot do that as 501c3s. There are lots of resources, though, where you can go to get information about where the candidates stand on particular issues. In particular, there's the AAPD Rev Up voter campaign that they do every year, and there's a lot of great resources on that website for how to register to vote and how to track where the candidates stand on the issues. Okay, so we're getting into Nicole's part of the presentation, but just to recap, some tips to remember. Constituents have the strongest voices. You are the constituent. You are the one that can vote for or against that person in office. You need to make your voice count. They care what you say. Your personal story matters, but they're not going to know it unless you tell it to them. So make appointments with their offices, establish those personal relationships with staff and your elected officials, bring your one-page bio, make it easy for yourself, and build those personal relationships. Bipartisanship is absolutely key. As I said before, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. And in today's hypercharged partisan world, we really have to step back and remember this, that disability is not a partisan issue. Social media is forever, so please be careful what you put out there, particularly if you're inclined to criticize a particular elected official, or if it's your representative and you're completely panning them on social media when you call to get a meeting. It's going to be much more difficult, and there's going to be a breach of trust there. So please always be respectful, no personal attacks, and remember to say thank you. Oftentimes they only hear from constituents when they have a complaint. If they voted a particular way or gotten funding for a program you're supporting, publicly acknowledge them, put it on social media, post it in your personal Facebook account, put it in your organization's newsletter, thank them for what they've done. And you'll see that they'll be there for you if you build these strong ties and relationships. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole and Kim, and Nicole can tell us a bit about her advocacy journey.
Nicole, are you there?
Other tips are legislators are people too. And also develop your elevator speech. Bust them when it comes to myth busting, like Medicaid is a Cadillac. Strength in numbers, speak from the heart, be honest, know how to curl your toes if somebody says something outrageous.
Hey, Nicole, what sparked your interest in advocacy, and how did you first get started?
Well, upon getting an HCBS, which is a Medicaid waiver in Vermont, I discovered the self-advocacy movement, the best kept secret, through a home provider. I attended my first self-advocacy conference in 2007. One of the first grants I worked on was on recognizing and responding to abuse. And then 2008, I started doing legislative advocacy, which is where I found my niche. Also, I've been following politics since 9/11 and the Clinton scandal, just to make you laugh. The thing I love about the public policy department is that it's rarely ever boring. It's always fast-paced. It's intellectually stimulating. There's always something to do. I love running around and being on the go.
Was there a time when you felt like your advocacy made a huge difference? Can you tell us about a particularly successful advocacy day?
Let's see. Stopping budget cuts on developmental services from a budget standpoint, from a legislative, as far as bills go, passing respectful language to eliminate the R word, and state statutes, passing the Walk With Your Class bill that allows students who are, let's say, they want to walk with a class of 18 but stay until they're 22 so they can, of course, get HCBS services. Well, in Vermont, one school denied one student this, and as a result, a lawsuit was filed. and they
And
found it was violated the ADA, so we ended up getting a bill passed. Also, Vermont ABLE Act implementation passed, changing the name of Combating Autism Act to Autism Cares, which is much more respectful.
what do
And
you
in
think worked?
2017, our activism helped save ACA and Medicaid.
And what do you think worked? Was it making a phone call? Was it that you provided testimony? Was it going to their office? What can you give us some more specific tips that were effective?
Testimony, participating in legislative advocacy days, doing legislative breakfasts, particularly around the budget, because in Vermont, they don't, for example, they don't get, okay, when you close an institution, you know, you're always going to have new people. It's like, okay, we gave you 8 million caseload, why are you coming back for more?
I think when I went on the Hill with you, Nicole, when we were fighting against cuts to Medicaid, it was so effective when you went with us and told your personal story and how Medicaid affects your life personally. It was really amazing how the staff would stop and listen to you, Nicole, and really pay attention. You want to tell folks about your disability employment guide that you developed, and I have it linked here on this webinar.
In the chat, I wrote a book on disability employment policy, just to help, you know, us preserve and protect the strength of the WIOA regulations. Given that we're in a time where, you know, people are talking, oh, communities for some, not for all.
And the guide is linked here for any of our participants to use it.
You can use it all. And there's also many other tools on the StarTech website.
What's StarTech stand for?
StarTech stands for Self-Advocacy Resource Technical Assistance Center. It's a Projects of National Significance grant that was given to Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, Green Mountain Self-Advocates, and UMKC, a bunch of organizations over 5 years. And one portion of it is to have 26 fellows do projects with, you know, government, either government or nonprofit organizations. Right now, for anybody in their states, if you have self-advocates who, you know, want to get into this field and go further, StarTech right now is seeking applications for fellowship projects.
Okay.
And also another thing coming up for anybody who's coming to the policy seminar, I'm looking for committee members to put on an event.
Oh, that's excellent. What's the event?
Like a fair. It's the it's a resource fair.
Okay. So they should.
We're another committee. We meet monthly via Zoom. You know, figure out, okay, what do we want to have for an agenda? What do we want to do for panels and whatnot? Erin Prangley of NACDD, National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities.
So they should email you, and we have your email address on here on the last slide. If they would like to participate in a planning committee to put together a resource fair, which takes place in Congress.
It's on the 25th.
Okay, on March 25th. So that's the Hill Day. And do you recommend that folks go to the Disability Policy Seminar, and if so, why?
Yes. It's one of the largest events, and it's a perfect day to, you know, educate lawmakers on the impact of their decisions.
Cool.
You know, and it's a way to bring, you know, people into the hearts of our communities.
Thanks, Nicole.
Community is for all.
Thanks, Nicole. We really appreciate your input.
And everybody be a broken record.
I'm sorry.
It's important for everybody to be a broken record, and, you know, the motto I live by: control your own destiny, or someone else will. And as you were discussing in the other thing, one thing, I'd say we've all learned from the ACA is that no legislation is good legislation unless it has bipartisan support.
Right.
Well, I think that's a good way to end. I love that quote from Nicole, control your own destiny or someone else.
Destiny or someone else will.
That's great, Nicole. Lauren, were there any questions that came in? I know we still have a few minutes.
I was able to answer some of the questions just within the chat. So far, we just have a couple thank yous and then one question. If the webinar is being recorded, it is being recorded for those of you that missed in the beginning, and we will distribute it via email. And there also will be a recording with closed captions available shortly after that as well.
And also, I posted a link there on tips, a link for tips for communicating with legislators as another resource.
Excellent. Thank you. All right.
Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, then I think this is I think we're
Thank you so
done.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining.
Everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.